What's up everyone, my name is Mark Hawk and today we're doing a quick review of Xiaomi's new Yi 2 action camera. This is the big successor to last year's Yi 1 action camera. Xiaomi known for packing a ton of features and high-end electronics into a really cheap and affordable action camera. There's a ton of different features and stuff we're going to try and go over in this camera, if not all of it. You can use any of these quick links you see on your screen to jump to the section you're most interested in, or you can bookmark and come back to them later. And if you don't have a lot of time, we're going to add a summary button in the bottom right just so you can get the gist on what is up with this camera. And if you don't make it to the end of this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Helps me out tremendously. And yeah, with that out of the way, let's get to the review. Now we're going to start off by taking a quick look at what's in the Xiaomi Yi box. Now, just as a quick disclaimer, the Yi 2 was sent to us early, a few weeks, as a review and for feedback before it initially launched in early July. Now, the Yi 2 is going to set you back about $250, and that's not going to include a dive case. Now, we're going to actually look very heavily into the dive case just because it is such an important part of any action camera. But again, it is a separate purchase. Now, in the Yi 2 action camera box, you will find the Yi 2. Again, we have the waterproof case with its own tripod mount, wireless remote, micro USB mini cable, selfie pole, and a smartphone extension holder for the selfie pole itself, and not shown a quick setup manual. Now at launch, the Yi 2 will be available in white, rose gold, and black, and right away you'll probably notice that its stapled iconic lime green is not in the lineup of colors you can choose from, which is a real shame that a lot of the design from the Yi 1 isn't coming over to the Yi 2, because the Yi 2 right off the bat looks very bland and very cheap, and it also kind of feels that way. Now, I do wish a lot more of those designs had come over, but at least when you pick up the camera, you'll notice it's very dense, it's very sturdy. There's a lot in there that's going on under the hood. But before we get to that, let's take a look at some of the exterior stuff. On top, we have the one button, which actually houses the one recording light. Now, there is another recording light on the front of this case, but that actually turns off once you actually start recording. The front is actually just an indicator light that will turn blue when you're above 70% power, it'll turn purple when you're below 70% power, and turn red when you're below 30% power, which is really good, but both of these lights are really hard to see in direct daylight. It would be really nice if we had that giant bright ring that came from the Yi 1 design on this camera, and again, it was sort of that iconic design. And since we only do have that one button, all of the other functions are designed to be used on that back LCD screen or through the Wi-Fi remote, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now on the bottom, we're going to have our 1/4 inch tripod mount, which is great because it means we can just mount this camera to whatever we have and whatever we need to with just a converter or just a simple tripod mount without the need of a case. So if we need really good audio, we don't have to worry about throwing this thing into a case or getting that in the way. Below that, we're going to find the battery compartment, which actually houses a 14 milliamp battery this time around. It's not compatible with the Yi 1 batteries, so keep that in mind. You'll need to start a whole new battery library. Now here is also where the micro SD card slot is as well. It's a little hard to get the card out just because of how it's in. You'll have to have kind of like long fingernails, but if you don't want to mess with any of that, there is a micro US mini slot on the side of the camera. Now again, we have this sort of cheap little tab that we have to pull up and kind of hold to the side. Otherwise, if we don't hold it while we're trying to plug in the USB cable, there's a good chance it's going to get in the way and block us from being able to push the cable and secure it all the way in. It's one of those like sort of slight little design things that I wish looked better and designed better on an otherwise really cool camera underneath the hood. Now again, the waterproof case is not included with the initial package, at least not in the bundle that we got. Now the waterproof housing does have a nice sort of glass flat lens on the front of it, and I say glass because it's a lot more durable than what we had on the Yi 1. You'll notice our Yi 1 case did not survive the damage, and this is a brand new Yi case that we brought on a trip, same trip that we brought this Yi 2 case on, and the Yi 2 case looks flawless. During our test with the case, we didn't have any fogging issues with the Yi 2, and that might be more mainly due to the low power, low heat processor that's inside that camera, but we'll get into that a little bit. Just know that with like 40 to 50 minutes of shoreside filming at 4K in some really heated weather, that camera did not fog up at all, while our Yi 1 got super foggy and had to be cleaned out maybe every 2 or 3 shots. Now in the dive case, it only ships with the one back door, and that's the completely sealed back door. We don't have a sort of open back door for better audio or a touchscreen back door that we can use to sort of interact with the touchscreen. So when we're inside the housing, you're very dependent on just that one button on top, but really if you want to change any of the settings, you're going to have to turn on Wi-Fi and control it through your phone. And that one button on top has a really good tension to it, which is really good if it's in your backpack or your pocket. You don't have to worry about it accidentally going off, accidentally having that button pressed or getting scratched up because of that front lens being really tough. This case is really tough, but that button is really hard to press down, so when you want to turn off that case, you'll have moments where you go to turn the camera off, but it kind of doesn't push all the way down, and you end up recording a 1-second clip 2 or 3 times in a row before you can actually get it to turn off. And the top of it has a closing latch with a lock on it. Now this is a really high tension sort of spring lock, so when you press it down it just locks into place, similar to GoPro's new design. However, this has the old locking mechanism that GoPro removed. Now my concern with this is that you'll get snow in there and that'll turn into ice, and at points you won't be able to open up that case. And even if you're not in snow or ice conditions where that's gonna lock up, you might be in something where there's a lot of dirt or a lot of sand that gets caught up in there. So my recommendation is bring like an Allen key or something with a really fine tool in your backpack on your adventures, just in case you ever need to open that case for any reason. Otherwise it'll be jammed. Now in the pack-in, you're also going to get a selfie stick. This is actually almost a stick that's very similar to what shipped with the Yi 1 bundle. Now the selfie stick itself is really cool this time around because it comes with a smartphone attachment holder, which is really great if we want to actually see what we're filming, change settings, quickly use it to take a photo or something like that with the phone. However, when we were using the app, the only sort of negative thing we could find with it is that when we're having it in horizontal view, the video doesn't turn horizontal. It's always stuck in this sort of vertical profile. Now that might be something that I overlooked on my end, but no matter what I did at the moment, could not get it to be in the proper aspect ratio that I wanted it to be. Now the selfie stick itself is very similar to the one it shipped with. It's actually pretty good as a starter selfie stick. It'll get you through most of your vacations and adventures. However, over like 6 months, I kind of broke mine just from normal twisting it, not even putting it in the water or anything like that. Just the tension from the twist will eventually wear out, and it'll either be impossible to open or impossible to keep closed. Now the Yi 2's lens is a 7-layer all-glass lens with a locked 2.8 aperture. The processor inside it is an Umbrella A9 SE75 CPU. Now throwing that model number at you probably doesn't mean a lot, but the big takeaway is that this is a newer processor than what's in the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition, and it does a lower power consumption with a lower heat output. This is why the Yi 2 is able to have an LCD screen and film at 4K, while the Hero 4 Black had to remove the LCD screen because of heat issues. And also in our 4K test, we had no overheat issues and no fogging of the lenses. Now the image sensor is a Sony IMX337. Again, probably another model number that doesn't mean a whole lot, but just know that this is actually filming 4K images, unlike other cheaper cameras that say they film at 4K, but really they're taking like 2K footage on a smaller image sensor and blowing it up to be 4K, or they're taking 4K images as photos at 15 frames a second. This can actually capture 4K images at 30 frames per second at a legit resolution and look super sharp. And since the image sensor is much bigger and better, it's going to give us better low light performance. It's not going to be great, it's still a small image sensor inside of an action camera, but it's going to be less grainy compared to cameras over the past 2 years. Now the LCD screen on the back is beautiful. It's a 2.19 inch. It's going to feel like it's pretty big. It's really nice, bright, and vibrant. It's got a 330 ppi sort of display resolution. It's a, well, I guess resolution 640 by 360, but the big takeaway from that is that it's really fast, it's really responsive, it's pretty easy to see in direct sunlight if you're not wearing sunglasses, and again, just super fast and responsive. You can get in there, change all the options you want. It's got swipe capabilities, it's got tapping on the screen capabilities, and it's just super fast. And then with the built-in speaker, you can review footage even with a lot of detail and complexity, just to sort of review footage if you want to keep it or whatnot. It's a really good screen is the bottom line. I really enjoy using it. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the battery in this camera is 1400 milliamps compared to GoPro's 1160 milliamps. But again, because of the processor we have in this camera, with the added battery life and the lower power consumption processor, we're going to get a lot more flexibility out of filming things like 4K and 1080p. So for comparisons, at 4K on the Yi 2, we were able to film for 1 hour and 47 minutes. Now, Xiaomi claims that you can get around 2 hours with this, so maybe with a little tweaking, we could have got maybe an extra 5 minutes, but this is pretty close to 2 hours. The GoPro Hero 4 Black, we got 52 minutes at 4K, but around the 36-minute mark, the camera shut off because it overheat. So we let it cool down, started again, went another 12 minutes, stopped, and it was on and off until the battery eventually died. So again, that overheating problem didn't even allow us to get to the full capacity of the battery before it shut down. Now in comparison to 1080p, we'll get about 2 hours and 36 minutes of just straight usage compared to the GoPro Hero 4 Black, where we get about 1 hour and 36 minutes at 1080p. Now, since this camera is packing in a lot of features that we haven't even got into, it's really important that it has a really good UI. Now, this UI isn't perfect, but it's far from being unreadable. Again, that LCD screen on the back is very fast and responsive, but it's really your only way to change the settings without having a Wi-Fi access. I really would have liked a second button just to kind of mess with the camera. And like I said, there's a lot to this camera, so it's a really dive deep, but after a week or two, you probably will start to remember where everything is. Things I got kind of cluttered, or I wish would go away, was I wish the ultra field of view, which we'll get into in a little bit, instead of it being a separate option from 4K, like instead of having 4K and then 4K Ultra, I wish you could just select 4K and then select your field of view options. This camera, I think, actually didn't have any field of view options now that I think of it, outside of just the ultra field of view and lens rectification, which we will get into a little bit. Now, this camera also has Wi-Fi, like I said, which is very important because if you can't access that LCD screen, the only way to change the options on it is through the Wi-Fi. Now, you can do 2.4 gigahertz, which obviously uses less power, but if you want to download clips and if you want super fast responsive, it has 5 gigahertz as well, which makes downloading clips to your phone through the app very easy and very fast. The app this time around is natively supported through the US, and it is basically completely overhauled. It's a whole new app from what you used on the original Yi. It basically loads up into a social app at first, which kind of sucks because it takes up some time from quickly getting into the camera and seeing your shot and changing the settings. You have to press a skip button at initial point if you don't want to log in, but if you do sign up, it helps load that whole process a little bit faster. Once we're in the app, we can change all the settings, we can download the clips like I said, you can even edit the clips a little bit, and you can download these 4K clips relatively fast and then post them right onto Yi's social network thing. It's not an Instagram, but it looks like an Instagram. The big thing is you can just download clips to your phone and you can change the phone options really quick. The only problem we ran into is if you have multiple Yi cameras and you're constantly switching between one Wi-Fi camera and then switching over to another camera's Wi-Fi source, you completely have to close out the app before you can open it and reconnect to it and change the settings, because sometimes it'll make it seem like it's working, but honestly, it's just we had to close the app every time to avoid that problem. So the Xiaomi Yi is going to ship with 9 different filming modes. It's basically going to be 4 video, 4 photo, and 1 that's a combination of the 2. Now, your video mode is your basic filming mode that you're going to use to film your 4K 30 frames a second videos all the way to your 720p 240 frames a second videos. Time-lapse videos is going to take a time-lapse and then convert all of those images into a video for you. Now, this is also going to be how you're going to do Microsoft's hyperlapse videos, which in our tests we never really seemed to get to work. I don't know if this is something that is not available at launch. It's just a feature they're advertising right now, but we just couldn't get it to work. Either way, take your time-lapse, turn them into a video. Slow motion is if you want to film but not convert the footage into slow motion later. You can do that all within the camera. Just keep in mind it might strip the audio. There's also loop mode, which is really good if you want to record just smaller chunks of film and then press the button again to basically save it. So if you want to record every 5 minutes, if you never press the button, it'll just keep re-recording over those last 5 minutes until something amazing happens. Then you just stop the recording and start it again. That way when you get home, you don't end up with 40 minutes of garbage and like 2 good clips. And as for photo mode, you're going to have your basic photo, which takes 12 megapixel image photos at 4000 by 3000. You can actually adjust the aspect ratio and resolution of these photos to take lower megapixel resolution photos at different aspect ratios. And while you're in photo mode, you can actually turn on lens distortion. That way you can basically reverse the fisheye effect in photos as well. And in standard photo mode, you actually have access to shutter time. So if you want to do long exposure photos, if you're in low light and you want it to turn it to auto, that way it auto corrects and takes really nice low light photos, you can do that. You have a timer option, which is pretty self-explanatory. You have your burst photo option, which will take a series of photos in a short series of time, so you can do like 60 photos over 1 second. And then you have your basic time-lapse photo, which can do in increments of 5.5, 1, 2, 5, 10, 30, and 60. Now, the 9th mode is a combination of video and photo at the same time. You can actually set your video mode, and then it will occasionally take photos at certain durations. That way, if you're doing something like skydiving, or if you're doing skiing and you're just trying to get shots of your buddies, you can just have the video of your adventure plus a few high-res photos. So probably the most alluring aspect of the Yi 2 is its ability to film 4K at 3840 by 2160 at 30 frames per second. That 7-layer glass lens, that Sony image sensor, that amazing processor, it's all helping us deliver these really good 4K images, and I don't mean 4K for $250, I mean 4K for the action camera market. It's beating out some of its competition, such as GoPro. When you put these two images side by side, and again, a lot of this is very subjective, but in terms of just basic things we could look at, we have a lot more sharpness coming out of the E2 at 4K. Things like image clarity are a little bit better, especially with things like text or fine detail. Our grain levels are quite lower in low light conditions, and basically overall, it just ends up generating a really nice, appealing image 95% of the time. And I say 95% of the time because some of the issues we've run into across all different resolutions is the image quality has a tendency to go a little bit warm compared to the actual lighting values. It seems that there's a lot of red in the environment. The white balance will sort of just shift and sort of overemphasize the red values. Now when you have a lot of blues or a lot of greens in your environment, the image tends to balance out fairly well and it's not too noticeable. But again, when you're playing back some of that footage and there's a lot of heavy red, whether it be a sort of pinkish sunset or maybe sort of the hiking trails of Southern California where you have a lot of reds and browns because of the desert conditions, things can appear very muddy in these scenarios. But generally, we still have some good clarity. Now, we did have moments where chromatic aberration will show up, and this was mainly when we had stabilization turned on. It's only available, again, in 4 different modes, so it shouldn't come across too often, but it is something to look out for. Now, on top of filming in just 4K, we have the ability to film in 4K Ultra, which basically gives us extra field of view on the left and right side of our screen and squish it down into a 16:9 aspect ratio. It does distort the image a little bit, but it's really good for tight scenarios or just doing really nice establishing shots. But do keep in mind, you will see a little more lens distortion, but we can enable lens rectification even in this mode. Now, on top of filming in 4K, we can also film at 2K and 1440p. Now, while these modes will not be as crisp as 4K, they won't be too far off, and having the ability to film at a 4:3 aspect ratio of 1440p is really good for things like mountain biking when you're on a trail, because it allows you to have more top and bottom field of view. Just in case you aim the camera too low or too high, you could still crop it out later at a 16:9 aspect ratio if you don't like the black bars on the side. It's just basically more coverage, and that's always good. And of course, there's 1080p filming at a whole variety of different frames per second. 30 frames per second will look almost just as good as 4K. 60 frames per second is pretty much in the same wheelhouse, but at 120 frames per second, the camera's going to take a big dip in quality as it lowers the bit rate in order to achieve being able to do 120 frames a second, and it's going to be noticeably softer compared to other resolutions. As you see us sort of cycling through these, we go from 4K where we're at 60 bits, look at 120 frames per second at 1080p, it's much noticeably softer. And if you want, 720p at 240 frames a second is available, but again, much lower bitrate, and the quality is going to be a step down from 1080p. Now, on top of being able to film at 4K and these other types of resolutions, we have the ability to turn on what's called lens rectification. And what this does is it undistorts the video footage so you can remove that fisheye effect from on this really wide field of view. Now, lens rectification is going to work on most modes. There should be a list right in front of you right now letting you know which options you can turn it on and off on. Now, on top of being able to undistort your footage with lens rectification, you can add that onto image stabilization to get a more steady shot. However, image stabilization is only available on 4 recording modes, and that's 2K, 1440p, 1080p at 30 frames a second, and 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is quite a shame since we have such a multitude of different recording modes. Now, when we first started using image stabilization, we were actually a little bit disappointed with the initial results. Initially, it was very jarring and very jittery. It would just sort of stay locked into a position only long enough to just sort of get used to it, and then it snaps to a new spot. So if you were just doing like minor walking and the camera wasn't in a really well mounted position to help absorb some of those vibrations, or it wasn't more towards the center mass of your body, such as like the center of your head or the center of your chest, if it was somewhere on the sides of those and it was sort of leaning left and right, whatever algorithm the camera's doing to try and keep that footage stabilized is just very jarring. It's very shaky on the edges. But then we went back and we put it up against another set of cameras, and we did a bunch more tests where we had it on a very nice secure mount. Sure, we were moving that mount around a lot, but it was sort of the center point of that camera rig. The stabilization results, when you put them side by side with the other cameras, much steadier. Even when we're doing sort of things where we're like sort of kind of going up steep cliffs, or when we're just sort of running around a parking lot, jumping over stuff, panning, even things like riding a bike end up looking good. It's just certain mounting modes with stabilization don't seem to work out really well, where it becomes really jarring. It doesn't seem to be anywhere near as good as what I'm used to with the Sony line of action cameras, but it's definitely better than it not being there, and it's better than my initial impressions. I actually went back and re-recorded this after I did some additional tests just to sort of point that out. Now the E2 is going to ship with a 360 omnidirectional microphone, and what this is the microphone that basically picks out sounds around you, but also eliminates background noise a little easier. It's still going to pick up things like wind noise that blow into it relatively easy, but the idea being that if you're talking to the camera in close proximity and you don't want the background noise to be picked up as much, it's going to do just that. However, if you're trying to have a conversation with someone who's not basically right on top of you, who's more than 6 feet away, and they're not yelling at you, a lot of that audio might get lost. Nori, I didn't bring a sandwich today.
Me either.
I didn't bring a sandwich today.
We can go eat afterwards.
That's what? Maybe.
Excited going
I
somewhere.
am. I'm already thinking
Anybody
about it.
interested in?
In our test, when we were talking back and forth with someone who was relatively maybe 10 feet away, I had a hard time hearing their responses from the camera, even though in person I had no problem holding up a conversation with that person. Now, if we're at somewhere that has like a concert or a lot of loud sounds, this should be a really good way to hear what people are saying close to you while also dimming down the background noise. However, I have a hard time believing it's going to work perfectly. It's going to be kind of hit or miss. Now, when you're filming with the diving case, it's obviously going to be a little more muffled. This actually might be great for concerts or things with a lot of wind noise, like racing or just sort of being on a high mountaintop with a lot of wind. That's going to help absorb a lot of that sort of wind shear, but it's also going to muffle down your sound. So talking to the camera, it's going to sound very low. You're going to have to be a little louder. If you're recording music at a concert, it should be loud that helps dampen that sound a little bit. It won't, in theory, sound better, but it might not clip as much. So diving case is kind of audio to be expected, but you will hear sounds through it, and they will be very distinguishable if they are at the right volume. So now we're testing out the audio. Now the camera is out of its designed case, so there's no muffled housing, there's no open doors, it's just completely out of the case. We have a bunch of city noise around us, so we can just see how much the environment is being captured out in the distance compared to what's being captured with my voice. We're relatively close to the camera, maybe about 3 feet away, not even. So yeah. So right now we're filming with all of the back doors off, but they are still in their waterproof housing. What we're going to do next is close up those back doors. We have a bunch, again, city noise behind me, so you'll just see how that sort of gets isolated, and yeah, we'll just go from there. Okay, you're gonna watch out this one. The E2 has 30 frames a second, normal field of view, not ultra. Video stabilization turned on and lens rectification turned on. The E1 is 1080p, 30 frames a second with lens rectification turned on. We're going to try and capture this seal that's just sort of hanging around here. I'm pretty sure he's already gone, but what the hell. Xiaomi is one of the few Chinese manufacturers out there that's making action cameras that just aren't real carbon copies of one another. You look at other Chinese manufactured action cameras and they do really shady things where they have 4K, but it's not really 4K, it's 2K footage blown up, or it's 4K photos that run at 15 frames per second, but they advertise as being a cheap, affordable 4K camera. Xiaomi has put together an actual 4K affordable camera. At $250, not only are you getting a camera that's well under the price that does 4K, it's actually better than much of the competition at double the price of $500. You have an image that can actually take 4K on an image sensor, and it's not being distorted to become 4K. It's natively 4K. It looks beautiful, it looks sharp at 60 megabits a second. The LCD screen on the back is super fast and responsive. The UI can use a little bit of cleanup, but for the most part, again, after a week of use, you'll be able to navigate through that thing like a pro. There's tons of features and options that are in there that work, that have a function and a purpose. They're not just sort of random generic things that kind of half-ass work. We have really great photos. We have the ability to do lens rectification to remove fisheye effect in most of our filming. Image stabilization isn't as good as I would have hoped, but it is there and it is good in sort of certain situations. 4K footage looks great most of the time all around. I do feel the footage leans a little bit on the warmer side, but most of the time it is a really nice, sharp, balanced image, but you do have to be aware that it does, again, lend to the warmer scenarios, which might actually make some of your footage inadvertently look a little bit muddy or smudgy. 2K and 1440p aren't as sharp as 4K, but that's slightly to be expected. 1080p at 60 frames per second looks really good. However, switching to 120 frames per second at 1080 or 240 frames a second at 720p is going to put the camera in a much lower bitrate mode. So that footage is going to be quite soft and not have as much detail. But again, that comes to be expected. There's only one color mode at launch, and it is a little bit contrasted where the whites are a little bit too hot. A flat mode is apparently going to be added in a firmware release, and that's one thing that's really good about Xiaomi. Say what you will about the Yi at launch, I wasn't a huge fan of certain things at launch, but they spent year after year just adding new firmware updates, new hardware updates, really listening to the community, and actually developing it for a US market base, which wasn't their original intent. And this time around, this is the first camera that's launching at a US based market. Its nighttime footage, while it's not really great in the grand scheme of things, it is an action camera with a really small image sensor, but what it does really nice is it lowers the amount of grain that we're used to seeing in action camera footage, especially compared again with other things on the market. We have tons of feature sets, a lot of things that will help us sort of not always rely on things in post-production, so that camera can do a lot that we want it to. Great app support. Outside of some hardware designs on the front, not having that lime green camera, the sort of housing for the camera itself not looking the great, not having the dive housing is a big kind of shame. But for the most part, if all you care about is video quality, you don't need to have the prettiest camera on your body or in your backpack. This camera is going to give you top-notch results. It's going to be a great summertime camera while you wait around and see what the competition is going to do at the end of the summer. Right now, you can have a nice 4K native action camera with an LCD screen that's super fast and super awesome. Anyway, everyone, that just about wraps it up for our first initial look at the Yi 2. Now we're going to be doing a bunch of comparisons over the next few weeks. We're going to be doing maybe some 4K highlight reels so you can take a look at all the shots we've been filming over the past few weeks with it. Be sure to like and subscribe. It helps this channel out tremendously. It helps me out tremendously. If you have any questions or feedback, post them in the comment section below. And if you're looking for more information about something we talked about, check out the more information section below this video. It houses a bunch of links to things like accessories, to related links, to even micro SD card selections, and anything you pick up in there helps my channel out tremendously. Yeah, be sure to share this video, and if you found it useful, let me know. I'm Mark Hawk. I'll see you all out there, everyone. Have a good one.